This is the Money Seed Podcast, where we discuss all things investing, plain and simple, the way it should be. Please remember, this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be investment advice. Welcome back to the Money Seed Podcast. He's Chris Ferguson. I'm Gabriel Stvori, and this is where we talk about investing. Chris, what do you got on the books for us today?
Well, on the books today, we'll start with our investing thought of the day. So I don't know if anyone's read it, but Principles by Ray Dalio is a phenomenal book. And one of the key takeaways I like from that book is Ray Dalio, who's a phenomenal investor. I think he averaged around 20% annual returns year over year over his career, which is a phenomenal return. So 20%, if you can do that consistently, then you're an all-star. One of the key takeaways of the book is he started out his hedge fund and then he was doing really, really well. And he made this colossal bet on certain monetary policies coming through. And everything he predicted up until what the dollar would actually do was correct. And then he was wrong. And then he lost his entire hedge fund. He went bankrupt, lost everything, had to move into this farmhouse. And then he rebuilt his fortune by, I think he started selling financial analysis papers. And then eventually he got his hedge fund up and going. And then he became who he became. But from that, he learned, and what one of his principles were in the book Principles, is that you should make your bets and be sure about your bets, but you should always factor in, what if you're wrong? You should always have an error rate in any sort of investment. And I thought that was really, really telling. In my line of work, I'm a physician. So in medicine, it's prudent to have something called a differential diagnosis. You say, based on what I'm seeing, this is what it is. However, if I'm wrong, here are the other list of things that it could be. Even though they may be a little bit far-fetched, they should still be on this list. And I think that carries really well over into the investing world of, you are pretty sure this investment's going to play out. You're pretty sure that this will play the way you think it will, but what if you're wrong? And if you're wrong, can you deal with the consequences of being wrong?
Yeah, well said. And, I always admire individuals who can come back from a huge disaster like that. Like a lot of people, right? You invest in something, you start a business, you go bankrupt. A lot of people would just give up. And yet here he is. He wasn't deterred, right? He says, okay, I know the mistakes I made. I've learned from my whatever. And he still had the self-confidence. He still had the drive. And he started from scratch a second time and built up a multi-billion-dollar empire. Good for him.
And the key, I think, I really admire that key is, what if you're wrong? It seems like the more confident someone is without giving that error rate, the less I trust their judgment, because that means they're just not seeing the blind spots or accounting for things that they may not be aware of. So jumping right in, what we are going to do today is share a investment that we just did. So we will actually go through the pictures and the numbers and discuss the returns that we got. And I will say all those lessons of Ray Dalio definitely apply, because when you're buying a house, all sorts of funny things happen that you would never have expected.
That's it. All right, Chris. So I'm going to share my screen and show you some pictures of what this house looks like. And all right, so this house is in Wasau. So Chris, maybe start us off. Why Wasau, and how did you find this house?
So there are a lot of books online really showing you how to optimize where you invest. You don't have to invest where you're investing. And Wasau is a nice, small, safe community. It's growing very quickly. Economically, it's very stable. There's lots of jobs. And I happen to live in this town, so it's close, but economically, it also makes sense because I have investment properties in places outside of where I live. So I'm familiar with that process, but it's a little bit easier to manage something where you live because you can keep an eye on it. And this town also is growing very well. So that's why we invest here. My wife is a real estate agent, so she found us this house, and it it looked good. We ran the numbers and it looked really good on paper. However, again, there's always these unexpected things that you factor in. So we had a fudge factor when we were buying this house to account for unexpected things. And there were lots of unexpected things. So Gabe, why don't you walk us through it?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And so, yeah, I think you mentioned a lot of good things there. So let me just quickly recap. The area is growing. The economy is healthy. You are familiar with the area. Your wife is a real estate agent, so she knows the market. And I think those are key, right? And so we found this property. We ran the numbers, and basically we're executing the BRRRR strategy. And our goal was to execute the BRRRR strategy from the get-go.
So for anyone who's, let me just jump in. So for anyone who isn't familiar with the BRRRR strategy, do you want to discuss it?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Good point. So BRRRR is an acronym. BRRR stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance. So the idea is you buy a house that needs a little bit of rehab works, a little bit of TLC. You fix it up. You find a tenant, and then you go back to the bank and say, hey, look, this house is worth a lot more now. I would like to take out a loan or refinance an existing loan on it. And so you try to reclaw as much of the cash that you put in as you can. And so that was our strategy there. Just to give you an idea, this is what the house looked like when we gutted this house, by the way. So
that's mid gut. So before we got to mid gut, there was a lot of work that went into taking down the ceiling, taking down the walls, ripping out the floors. That bathroom all had tiles. So we ripped out that tile ourselves.
Correct. Everything that you see here was basically gutted. We gutted everything. The only thing we kept in the house were the kitchen cabinets and the bathtub. Everything else was replaced. The flooring, the ceiling, the walls, the vanity, the toilet, everything was replaced. And this is what it looked like after everything was done. New flooring, white paint throughout, kitchen cabinets painted white. We had a new fridge and some appliances. Everything was a nice matching white color. New tiles in the bathroom, new toilet, new vanity. And it really has a nice, fresh look to it. And this is how the numbers shake out. So our cash purchase price was $54,500. After we completed the rehab, we went through all the receipts, all the costs, and it cost us $17,500. That includes everything. All the material, all the equipment rental, all the work that we subcontracted out. And so it was $17,500 cash that we paid for the rehab for a total investment of $72,000 cash. And we are in the process of going back to the bank. The reappraisal is around $90,000. We are pulling back a 75% loan to value. There's some fees, of course, with refinance. We are aiming to get back $67,000 in cash, which means our net cash outlay is only going to be $5,000. So we invested $5,000 of our cash into this business to basically own this property. And for this $5,000 cash, we estimate that our monthly cash flow is going to be $145 a month. So just cash on cash, we're doing very well. So we are above 20% just cash on cash. And on top of that, we are building equity. So every month, we are slowly building equity in the house. We only own 25% equity right now. The rest is a loan, but slowly we are building up that equity. So even just cash on cash, it's a fantastic return. And on top of that, the equity is a nice bonus. So it's a long-term investment.
And that doesn't even factor in mortgage pay down. So mortgage pay down, appreciation, and cash flow.
Correct.
So if we could do this consistently, we're good to go, assuming we can do it consistently.
Correct.
But there was a lot of planning. So there was a lot of planning in this entire strategy.
Yeah. So exactly. Yeah. And a couple of things, a lot of planning, a lot of full starts. So we probably looked at somewhere between 5 and 10 houses before we found one. And so the other thing is in the rehab cost, we did some of the work ourselves. So there is some labor in here that we're not showing because that's our labor, right? Our own elbow grease, so to speak. And so we did some of the labor ourselves, but no, the numbers work out very well. And it took us 4 months. So correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, I think we got the keys to the property sometime in late July.
Something like that.
Yeah, and the tenant just moved in right now, mid-October. So give or take 4 months for the process. And so if if everything goes well, we should be able to do this 2, maybe even 3 times a year. 3 times would be really nice. If we can flip this money 3 times a year, that would be ideal. Yeah.
And exactly like you said, so Gabe put in a lot of time. My wife, Kristen, put in a lot of time. I put in a lot of time. And clearly, we're not going to do that on every single property. And some people would have asked me, like, why are you doing this? Because the cost per hour to hire someone to just rip out carpet and rip out tile is a lot less than I'd be making at my actual job. However, I think there is value. I would argue priceless value. It's priceless knowledge of really understanding what it's like to put in tile, what it's like to put up drywall, what it's like to. So Gabe, my wife, and I, we gutted the bathroom, we changed the toilet, we ripped out tile, put down tile. So understanding that process, I look at houses a lot differently now because I've done it, and you could watch all the videos in the world, but until you do it, you don't. I think it's difficult to really understand it.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. So this was for us a learning house, right? This is how we start to learn about this business, right? This is the first property that we bought together. You've had some, and you still have some rental properties on your own. I have some rental properties on my own, but this is the first one we purchased together. This is the first one that we did a lot of rehab work on. And so this is for us was a learning house. One of the reasons why it's a small house, it's only 600 square feet, is because it's a great house to learn on. If we make a mistake in the estimating, or the work is more than we thought, or if something goes wrong, we can control the cost a lot better than if this was a 2,000 square foot house. So it's a small house. It's a great house to learn on. Knock on wood, we got lucky. In other words, so far everything has gone really well. We had some surprises, but nothing that really derailed the project.
Do you want to comment on any of those surprises?
So, yes. So when we're doing the bathroom, we found out that, we thought, okay, I was going to take the toilet off. We're going to retile, put the toilet back on. And as soon as we take the toilet off, we saw that there was some water damage in the subfloor underneath the toilet. And so we had to remove a chunk of the subfloor, replace a chunk of the subfloor. The toilet itself was damaged when we removed it. So a simple, let's remove the toilet tile and put the toilet back on.
So I'll take responsibility for damaging the toilet. That was entirely my fault. So this is part of the surprises, because you think, oh, we will just move the toilet, fix the leak, and then put it back on. But of course, because it was an old house, the toilet was rusted on. We couldn't get those bolts off. And I tried prying it a little bit too high, a little too roughly, and I cracked the toilet. So there's the price of a toilet that we didn't account for in these rehab costs, because we never intended to replace the toilet.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, replacing a toilet, $100, $150 for a brand new toilet, and then maybe we spent an extra half a day longer than we anticipated because we had to cut out that subfloor section and put it back in. So there was some extra work. But on the other hand, we did learn that, hey, there was a leak. The toilet that we replaced had a leak underneath the subfloor that you couldn't see, but was actually damaging the floor. And it wasn't installed really all that well. And now we fixed that. So that's a problem that we fixed. That could have been a much bigger headache, say 2-3 years down the road.
Exactly. Because if that toilet would have leaked and caused water damage, now we fixed it. And I've learned that just completely gutting a place and doing it properly is better than doing it quickly and not properly, because then you just have a much more solid product. So you don't have to go back in and fix it later on.
Yeah, the other thing we learned is your comment earlier that, hey, it might be just a lot more cost effective if you hire somebody. It's not always easy to hire somebody. Right now with the market being as crazy as it is, it's actually quite hard to find good help, right?
And I think that's why it's useful to know that if you really have to fix something, you can. And sometimes it's a lot more costly, because if you want to replace, say, the covers on light switches, you're going to have to hire an electrician, which is probably $100 an hour to come in and do that, when really either you can do it, or so you can hire someone and just show them how to do it for way less than $100 an hour. Because an electrician is billing out at that $100 an hour rate, but the task itself is not worth $100.
Exactly. And plus now, like you mentioned earlier, we did a lot of the work ourselves, like with the drywall or even doing some of the tiling. And so we have a much better idea now of what that work entails, right? So we're going to have more accurate estimates in the future. We're going to be able to negotiate with somebody better in the future because we understand the labor and the cost and the time involved. And so this is how you learn any business. You have to get your hands dirty. You got to do it. And the more you do it, the more confident you get, the more knowledgeable you get. And that's how you get better over time.
And I think if you're going to be serious about real estate investing, I think you should really learn it all the way through. So I'm using my background again in medicine about this. So when we're studying medicine, we don't just say, well, you have to take out someone's appendix. So you just walk through the steps of make this incision here, take out the appendix, chop it off, and then sew it up. Like you can show someone how to take out an appendix relatively quickly. It's a straightforward procedure. It's just a series of steps. But all the background into appropriately making the diagnosis of appendicitis versus the thousands of other things it could be. And then the sterile technique to go into the operating room, which things to use. And then what about the complications? What if there's a leak? What if there's an infection? How do you deal with all these things? So it's and then if there is an infection, what antibiotic to use? And if the first antibiotic doesn't work, then what about the second antibiotic? There's all these other things that go into it. It's not just, can you do the procedure, but it's all the things leading up to, should you, and then what do you do if things go wrong? And that's what I liked about this approach with this house is we chose a manageable project that we could fix with finances because it was a $55,000 house. And by learning the details as to where do you buy the tile, how do you put in the tile, but if you crack the toilet, all the details of all the bearings that have to go into fixing the toilet, like all these little details, it's not just can you buy a house or buy the house and then rent it out? Because that's, I think, where things go sideways.
Here's a question for you, Chris. How did you get the confidence? I mean, even before, like when you first had the idea that, hey, Gabe, let's start a real estate business and start buying properties and rehab them and rent them out. How did you get the confidence to say, you know what, I think I can do this?
Well, this will sound really silly, and I think my wife is tired of me saying this, but I think there's enough information out there on really anything. So if you read a couple of books, listen to some really good podcasts, and talk to people who've done it, then or even if you can't directly talk to them, you can read their books or listen to their interviews. And if they can do it, you just follow those steps. And there's learning points, and you start small and you learn, but you know the trajectory you're on, and then you do it. But that's the same path as medicine. Like the way I got into medicine, I went way back in the day. I went to the bookstore and bought a book, How to Get into Medical School. I just read the book, and then I bought a second book, and the second book was basically a reiteration of the first book. So I was like, okay, if two different people are saying the same things, that's what I'm going to do. I just follow the book, and that's what I did. So with real estate, I'm following the exact same template. And I think you can follow that exact same template for anything you want to achieve.
Well said.
But you have to be willing to go through those steps.
That's right. You have to make a commitment, and you gotta do it. Yeah. And one of those podcasts that you mentioned, right? Like one of my favorite ones, and I think you're the ones that introduced me to this podcast, is the Bigger Pockets podcast, right? Which is very real estate investment specific, right?
Yes.
And that's one of those where, I started listening to it. I know you listen to it as well. And that's all they talk about is real estate investment, how you do it, what are lessons learned. And that's one of the many great resources out there. It's completely free. Older episodes they've ever published are free. Go online, YouTube. They're on YouTube, they're on iTunes, they're on Spotify. And if you're serious about real estate investment, that's where you should start, right? As one place.
So same question to you, Gabe. What gave you the confidence to do this?
The confidence was that I had I had some real estate experience before, right? I have my own rental properties, not too many, but I have some. And when I was young, my dad used to fix up houses and I used to help him out. So I had some idea of how the work is done. And so I wasn't afraid of the downside. In other words, the downside was within my level of acceptable risk, right? So if this project would have gone completely sideways, and we would have lost, say, $10 or $20,000 each on it or something. Like in my mind, I was okay with that. I was like, you know what? I think we can control the risk. I think this project is going to go well. If something doesn't go well and I lose $10,000, I lose $20,000, I will be okay. Like it's not going to destroy my marriage. I will still be able to, feed the kids and all that. Like I'll be okay. And so I think that's key in any investment is look at the worst thing that can happen. Can you survive? Yes. Okay. So then the risk is acceptable. So then go and do it. At some point, you just have to do it, right? You just have to convince yourself that you're going to be okay. And yeah, that's it.
And I think we're both on the same page with that. And I think it's important to realize that we're starting small because we're taking it very seriously, but we're learning on little projects. We're not just jumping into this huge project. And listening to a lot of Bigger Pockets podcasts, some people just dive into these very, very large projects, but and sometimes it goes well, but I think that's more luck versus skill. Because even just this little house that we went through, by doing the drywall, by doing the bathroom, when I walk through a house now, I see it very differently. And I've noticed I pick up mistakes that other people have made, but I never would have noticed those before had I not actually gone through the work.
That's it. That's experience, right? And that's the experience you get only from doing it, right?
But it's hard. And if it were easy, I think everyone would do it. I mean, I had to take time off work. It was for me, it's cheaper to pay someone to do this. And I took a week off work to really just work for this project. But most people are not willing to do that. It's much easier just to hire someone to do it. But I'm not doing it to make money. And you did, and Gabe, you did the exact same thing. Like you took a week off work. So we both took a week off work and worked, I would say, really hard. And I think I don't know what you thought about when you went back to work, but after spending a week, so we put in long hours. You were up before I was. Like you were up at probably 6. I was up at like 7 or 8. And then we would go till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night straight. Like there was no long lunch break. Like we would stop, we would eat, and then keep going. When I went back to work, that was the easiest Monday I have ever gone back to. And I thought about that because every time I took a vacation, I go on vacation and I go back to work and it's like, oh, this is so hard. Going back to work after this, cake.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, like I said, we were in there 12 hours a day, most days. And we worked right through the weekend as well. And I was so consumed by the work of we had to do something. I didn't even know what day it was half the time. Like, because we're working Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm like, what day is it today? It doesn't matter. I got to, fix the floor. I got to do the drywall, whatever. So it was a great way to actually disconnect from the everyday life for a little bit. It was a bit of an escape that way. But it's funny, out where I live on the West Coast, as you know, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we don't have IHOP, like International House of Pancakes. We don't have that here, and I love IHOP. I grew up in the Midwest, and so you have an IHOP near your place. And so I was in the IHOP every day when they opened at 6 a.m. They opened at 6 a.m. I was in there like 5 minutes after they opened and I had a massive omelet. And that's how I started my day every day. It was great.
By the end of the week, you're the regular.
I was the regular. Yeah. They knew what I wanted. It's like, yeah, okay, we'll bring the omelet, with the, what did I get every day? It was like a mushroom and spinach omelet with egg whites only and a black coffee. And like the guy knew by like the 5th day, that's what I'm going to have every morning. Great. But, yeah.
And then long term, I have 2 little boys, and I think assuming they don't hate it, well, actually they probably will hate it, but they'll do it anyway, is I plan for them to go through that because I think it's important to understand what it's like to work with your hands and do real physical work. There's value in mental and intellectual work, but there's also a lot of value in hands-on. This is how you put up drywall. This is how you change a toilet. And it's different because in the corporate world, you have to have, I'm sure you know about this. You have to have meetings, you have to get consensus, and there's meetings upon meetings upon meetings, and it's very slow to get anything done. When you're working on a project like this, you don't have time for 1,000 meetings. It's like, you need to put in the tile, pick the tile, done. You need to pick the grout. This is the grout, done. Move on.
That's it. Yeah. And, at the same time, I mean, the way you and I described it, it was like, oh yeah, it was fun. This was a fun little project. Nothing went wrong. It was a fun project, but those 8 or 9 days while we were out there, working 12 hours a day, there were some stressful days. Like there were some days when, we were behind work or something was not going right or the tile cutter wasn't cutting the tile straight or whatever, like we had equipment problems.
Yes.
So there were some stressful days there. Don't get me wrong, but you're right. Like you have to, it's every time you learn a skill, and whether that's, like you said, it's a mental skill or an educated skill, or whether it's something with your hand, every skill that you learn is empowering. It empowers you. It gives you self-confidence. I mean, I'm all about skills. And so I actually don't mind the physical work. I mean, yes, it's extremely tiring, but in short bursts, like we did there, I think it's good. I agree with you. I think it's good for the mind. It's good for the spirit. Maybe not so much for the body, but
In short spurts, it's good.
yeah.
I do think that it was, to me, I was really impressed because I remember the night that we were tiling the bathroom and we were going to get the tile saw back to the hardware store before it closed. So we just quickly decided on a process of my wife would tile and then Gabe, you would cut the tiles and then measure them, and I would basically just assist. And it worked really, really, really well. But we didn't have to have 1,000 meetings to develop a process. This is what the process needs to be. This is what we're going to do. And then we got it done on time at 9 o'clock. I think it was like 9 o'clock.
Oh, it was 9 o'clock on the button when
on
we
the
dropped
dot.
off. Yeah, totally.
Yes. So, and we got it done because we had a whole schedule that we really had to stick to. And if that ran over into the next day, then that just further pushed everything out.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, deadlines, work miracles, right? When everyone's working to the same deadline, it's really good. It's a really good motivator.
yes.
So
So on that note, I think what we can do is close off this podcast with saying, Gabe, you're a fantastic business partner. Kristen, on the ball. Of course, thanks to your wife for watching the kids while you're away slaving. And I think what we can do on the next podcast is possibly talk about what it takes to build a team. Well, how do you find a business partner? Because I would say we all have unique skill sets, and the team as a whole is much better. I would say since Gabe, we started partnering, we've done a lot more than I have in the last 10 years. We already renovated a property. We're looking for a second one. So I think there's a huge value in teams. So next podcast, if you're okay with it, we'll discuss how do you pick a business partner, and why first should you pick a business partner, and how do you make that team work?
sounds like a plan.
Thank you all for listening to this podcast. Gabe, do you want to close us out?
Thanks very much, Chris. Yeah, if you like this episode, hit like, hit subscribe, and tune into the next episode as well. All right. Thanks very much, everyone. See you
Thanks
next
all.
time. Thanks.